Cardinal Pell judgment.
I sentence you to a total effective sentence of 6 years imprisonment.
The most senior Catholic to be convicted of sex abuse learns his punishment in an Australian courtroom. We have a report, plus reaction from Rome. Human rights. We break down the U.S. State Department's annual report about freedom and oppression around the world. Fighting modern-day slavery. The Vatican's ambassador to the UN is helping address an issue important to the faithful. We have reaction from New York City. And 6th anniversary, a significant date today for Pope Francis and the Catholic Church. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, March 13th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. As Pope Francis marks his 6th anniversary as pontiff on retreat, one of his top advisors is sentenced in Australia to 6 years for sex abuse. Cardinal George Pell is the highest-ranking Vatican official ever convicted of abuse. We have reaction from the Vatican, but first we will take you to Melbourne, where the judge delivered the sentence to him live on Australian television. Cardinal George Pell, who has served the Catholic Church for decades, is now seen in a different light.
You freak! You're filth! You're the devil! You're evil! You're a monster!
The 77-year-old received a 6-year prison sentence for sexually assaulting 2 choir boys during the 1990s.
Cardinal Pell, would you please stand?
Chief Judge Peter Kidd called Pell's attacks, quote, breathtakingly arrogant.
I sentence you to a total effective sentence of 6 years imprisonment.
The judge added Pell was, quote, not to be made a scapegoat for any failings or perceived failings of the Catholic Church.
Justice has been served. The truth has come out. I believe that because of today, the survivors and victims have been well served.
But not everyone agrees. Pell's supporters say he's a victim of an anti-Catholic campaign in Australia, and the sentence is a miscarriage of justice.
I heard all the evidence, and how a jury was able to reach this verdict is utterly incomprehensible. And a lot of other Australians are saying the same thing. It's unbelievable that this verdict has been handed down.
Pell maintains his innocence, and his lawyers say they will appeal the conviction in June.
Lauren, the Vatican has made no public comment today, but the Pope's spokesperson, Alessandro Gisotti, tells me that he has nothing to add to his February statement on Cardinal Pell. In that statement, he said that the Vatican will wait for the appeals process to conclude. Gisotti also recalled in that communique that Cardinal Pell maintains his innocence and has the right to defend himself until the last stage of the appeals process. Victims of clergy sex abuse are welcoming today's sentencing, but say it's not harsh enough. Supporters of Cardinal Pell continue to say that the trial was flawed and that he himself is a victim of anti-Catholic campaigning. Pope Francis is on retreat outside of Rome. Today, he's also marking the 6th anniversary of his pontificate. Vatican sources tell me they're shell-shocked. According to the court order, Cardinal Pell must serve at least 3 years and 2 months of the 6-year sentence, if it's upheld. Back to you, Lauren.
Thank you. Alan Holdren reporting. A new poll says a rising number of American Catholics are re-examining their commitment to the faith. According to research from Gallup, 37% of American Catholics say they are questioning whether to remain in the church following the sexual abuse scandal. That's up from 22% in 2002. That's the year the Boston Globe's stories ran on misconduct among clergy in Massachusetts. The United Nations is hosting conferences on women and children convened by the Holy See mission to the UN. Today's topic, human trafficking. Here's one nun's perspective on how to end it.
We are the leading community which is helping with education, because basically we believe education is the mode that can change the entire society.
Experts say women and children are the most commonly trafficked group, particularly in countries like India. Their low status in society and lack of understanding of their own rights makes them easy targets. We welcome Sabrina Farisi to our broadcast. She joins us from the United Nations in New York City. Welcome.
Thank you, Lauren. Good to be here.
You heard from leaders in the movement. What struck you the most?
You know, when we think about slavery, we often think that it's something that happened in the distant past. But unfortunately, it is still something that is happening today in the modern world, even in North America, and it's hidden. The numbers are massive. We learned that there are 40 million victims of human trafficking around the world. We also learned that criminals are making about $150 billion off of this trade. We found out that some families are actually selling their children sometimes when they're so desperate for money.
We know it's mostly women and girls affected by human trafficking. I want to understand the Holy See's global goal on this issue at the UN.
The Holy See's global goal on this issue is to eliminate human trafficking around the world. Pope Francis met with officials at his papal residence in Rome called Casa Santa Marta in 2014. They signed a declaration which has been called the Casa Santa Marta Declaration, and its goal is to eliminate human trafficking around the world by bringing together Catholic religious leaders with law enforcement officials. And they are now in about 35 countries.
So where does human trafficking rank in the Holy See's priorities at the UN? When I covered the UN General Assembly, I think 2 years ago, the big issue was nuclear disarmament. Can you put this in context?
I believe that Pope Francis's priorities with human trafficking, this is one of his top 5 priorities. In 2015, he actually spoke about human trafficking when he was here in New York at the United Nations. And he is constantly making statements and comments about this. It is very near and dear to his heart.
Sabrina Farisi reporting from the United Nations. Thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you, Lauren.
A top U.S. diplomat told us abortion is not a human right under international law. His comments came as the State Department released its annual human rights report. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee is at the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Lauren, good evening. Ambassador Kozak making it clear not only does the State Department not consider abortion a human right, they don't even use the phrases right to abortion or reproductive rights in their new report. Officials here are very careful of their wording as they lay out exactly what is and what is not considered a human rights violation.
The United States did not seek and did not obtain international consensus that there's a human right to abortion.
Ambassador Michael Kozak defending the State Department's position that abortion has never been an international human right. He says the State Department has the same stance as it did last year when they removed the term reproductive rights from the report.
And so rather than using a term that now has 2 completely divergent meanings to it, we decided to go back and use the U.S. statutory standard that we report on coercive population practices such as forced and coerced abortion and involuntary sterilization.
Abortion was one of many issues Kozak addressed today in summarizing the department's annual human rights report. In it, the State Department calls out a U.S. ally, Saudi Arabia, for the death of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. The report details how Khashoggi was killed by Saudi agents while he was inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in October. However, it does not implicate the Crown Prince, who many believe may have ordered the killing. Kozak says he won't blame anyone until the investigation is finished. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who unveiled the report, says many countries continue to persecute ethnic and religious minorities. He says China is in a league of its own, detaining 1 million workers in, quote, re-education camps.
The government also is increasing its persecution against Christians, Tibetans, and anyone who espouses different views from those or advocates those of government or advocates change in government.
China, of course, isn't the only nation that persecutes minorities. The State Department also calls out the usual suspects, countries like North Korea, Iran, Cuba, and Russia. Pompeo says he wishes there were less human rights violations compared to last year, but he says that's not the case. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. The Attorney General of Venezuela accuses opposition leader Juan Guaidó. He was behind the country's days-long power outage.
Yo soy ingeniero, y si podemos resolver el tema eléctrico.
Guaidó denies it, telling supporters he did not cause the problem, but he can solve it. Electricity is now returning, but water shortages continue to cripple this socialist country. Coming up, why a teenager from Rhode Island traveled to Capitol Hill to fight for life. And the governor of California makes a controversial decision about the death penalty. On Capitol Hill, Democrats unveiled the Equality Act, which critics are saying will accelerate the pace of anti-Christian bias in society. The law would add protections for sexual orientation and gender identity under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Democrat leaders say they want a swift vote on the bill and call the military transgender ban cruel and hateful. Rhode Island is considering a bill allowing abortion up to the moment of birth. It's a similar bill to one signed in and enacted in New York State. But one pro-life teen is voicing her opposition here in Washington. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi introduces us to her.
We're fighting for human lives.
From the Rhode Island State House to the U.S. Capitol.
And I can't help but ask and wonder if future generations will ask, how did 21st century Americans not see the harms in what they were doing?
College freshman Melissa Cifuentes opposes Rhode Island's bill to protect abortion up to birth. It passed the state's House, but not yet in their Senate.
If Rhode Island is the next state to be added, then it's very easy for more states to go along with it. It's starting to become normalized.
She's fighting back alongside national Republican leaders.
Let us have a vote. What are you afraid of?
The House GOP is trying to force a vote on a bill to protect babies surviving abortion.
So we can stand up and protect the sanctity of human life. Mr. Speaker.
17 times.
This bill, Mr. Speaker, does not impose any restrictions.
The House.
And each time.
The gentlelady was seized.
Shot down.
As recorded in Section 956 of the House Rules and Manual, the chair is constrained not to entertain the request unless it has been cleared.
Let's get all of this and have the argument, the debate on this. Why hush it up? Why the cover-up?
This 19-year-old also won't stay silent.
I was never one to really speak out about abortion, but now I feel like it is my responsibility to speak out and use my voice, and I can't stand on the sidelines and wait for someone else to speak out when I have a voice as well.
She's hoping to become a lawyer and work in politics. For now, she has her work cut out back home in Rhode Island.
Over on the Senate side, 44 Democrats voted to block the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. Some said it wasn't needed because infanticide is right now against the law. But what this bill actually does is it says doctors and nurses must treat a baby surviving abortion and then rush that child to the hospital. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. A federal appeals court upholds an Ohio law blocking taxpayer money from Planned Parenthood. The measure bars funds from going to entities that perform or promote abortions. Opponents argued it imposes an unconstitutional condition on public funding. There was no immediate news on whether Planned Parenthood would appeal to the Supreme Court. Last week, we asked President Trump for his reaction to a lawsuit filed by Planned Parenthood, and he said the White House would provide a response, and now we have it. Deputy Press Secretary Judd Deere tells News Nightly, quote, "This administration has made clear that we will protect life at all stages, and this rule is another important step," and he is referring to that Title X rule designed to shift tax money from abortion providers to community health care providers. Planned Parenthood is the nation's largest abortion provider, and it could lose millions of dollars. It's trying to block the new rule. California slams the brakes on the death penalty. Today, Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom signed an executive order halting executions on the nation's largest death row. Catholic officials praised the decision, but one person isn't happy about it: President Trump. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. The president using Twitter to vent about Governor Newsom's decision today. Now, we've heard President Trump refer to the death penalty as some sort of solution. The Catholic Church calls it inadmissible.
The governor in California uses executive power today to keep the death chamber vacant.
We are, as I speak, shutting down, removing the equipment in the death chamber.
The state hasn't had an execution since 2006. Still, the announced reprieve for more than 700 death row inmates isn't sitting well with President Trump. Sharing his grievance on Twitter today, defying voters, the governor of California will halt all death penalty executions of 737 stone-cold killers. Friends and families of the always forgotten victims are not thrilled, and neither am I. Last month, we heard President Trump praise China's crackdown on opioid drug dealers.
They don't have a big drug problem in China.
They have a thing called the death penalty.
A week before that, he told law enforcement officials the ultimate price should be paid for killing a cop.
In my administration, we strongly believe that criminals who murder cops should get the death penalty.
That all human life has inherent value and dignity, and that even is for people who've committed harm in society.
Anthony Granato with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops pointed us to the Church's stance on the death penalty, developed in the Catechism text, with changes approved by Pope Francis last year to read, "The Church teaches in the light of the gospel that the death penalty is inadmissible because it is an attack on the inviolability and dignity of the person." Granato is welcoming the California governor's executive order today.
That we need to think very broadly about what it means to be pro-life, what it means to value all human life and dignity. So I think this is a step forward in that.
The USCCB official we spoke with there is applying this question to not only Catholics, but all people, the governor of California and President Trump included. What kind of society do we want to create, and how can we promote the dignity of human life? Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons, thank you for that report. President Trump issues an emergency order grounding several Boeing airplanes. The order includes the 737 MAX 8 and MAX 9 aircraft. It's effective immediately. Many nations already grounded the Boeing planes following the Ethiopian airline crash Sunday that killed more than 150 people. Up next, how a Catholic author and podcast host plans to end the pornography epidemic. And an important milestone for Pope Francis. A Catholic author and podcast host creates a new video series to help men fight their addiction to pornography. Matt Fradd, host of the podcast Pints with Aquinas, launches his 21-day detox program, Strive, at the end of this month to offer men a step-by-step plan to break free. And Matt Fradd joins me now via Skype. Matt, welcome to our broadcast.
Thank you, Lauren.
You say more than 28,000 people watch pornography every second. Your program is designed specifically for men and focuses on scientific data. Why do you do that?
Right. Over the last 40 years, there's been a lot of studies that have come out of academia from neurology, psychology, and sociology. All of it is saying quite unambiguously that pornography is detrimental to the consumer, to our relationships, and to society as a whole. You could say that science is finally catching up with the truth that the Church has always taught.
Let's talk about morality. As a Catholic, how does faith play a role in your program?
Right. Well, I think it takes into account the truth of the human person. We've been made in the image and likeness of God, who is love. We've been created by love, to love, and for love. If we get that wrong, life will become senseless to us. And this is what pornography does. It's a counterfeit of the beauty and goodness of human sexuality and relationships. And so recognizing we've been created for love and doing away with anything that's a counterfeit to that.
You've studied this issue quite extensively and have a book called The Porn Myth, which spelled out how the chemical changes in the brain are equivalent to those who use drugs. So your program, 21-Day Detox, I was reading through it, and it seems like you take a typical approach to addiction, including filling the void that is left by leaving that habit behind, and then realizing that setbacks are to be expected. What else?
Right. So as of today, there are currently 41 neuroscience-based studies on porn users, and every one of them supports the addiction model. We used to think in order for something to be addictive, it had to be a drug you put into your body. We now know that's not true. We know that behaviors like gambling can be just as addictive as substances can. And it's important to realize that if we want to break free of porn. Freedom from this stuff is not so much a destination that we reach after we've done X, Y, or Z. Rather, it's a daily choice that we have to make by our actions.
I have to turn to this case in England that just not a lot stuns me, but this one stunned me. There are 5 mothers in England, and they're getting attention for creating a porn movie that promotes healthy attitudes towards sex and provides an alternative to online movies depicting rape. But they want their kids to see it.
Well, I think we should agree with the sentiment that violent and rape-based pornography is revolting. And clearly, there are some forms of pornography that are less bad than other forms. But that just because something's less bad than something else, that doesn't make it healthy. right? That would be like saying smoking 5 cartons of cigarettes a day is worse than smoking 1 carton. Well, okay, but that doesn't make smoking 1 carton healthy. And in fact, all of the data is suggesting that pornography is leading to these negative changes in the brain. It's leading to things like sexual dysfunction. It's leading to dissatisfaction in romantic relationships, whether or not the pornography is hardcore in the sense of violent.
And I would imagine it goes to family structure as well. It breaks up families.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you think of what is the core of society. Well, it's the marriage, and what's the core of marriage? It's a sexual act. So when you pervert that, you do pervert the family.
Thank you so much, Matt Fradd, creator of Strive, a 21-day detox from porn.
Thanks very much, Lauren.
Finally, tonight, 6 years ago today, the world was introduced for the first time to Pope Francis.
Habemus Papam.
Thousands packed into St. Peter's Square as the late Cardinal George announced, "We have a Pope." Moments later, Argentina's Jorge Bergoglio walked out onto the balcony of St. Peter's and greeted Catholics as the church's new leader. He had one simple request: pray for me. I'll ask that too. Why not? Pray for me. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and at Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. We will leave you tonight with more from 6 years ago. Good night, and God bless you.